Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So we're hearing from Allan Leighton today, and as you will remember, but for the benefit of those watching, Mr. Leighton gave oral evidence to this inquiry on the 17th of April of this year. And on that occasion, Mr. Leighton confirmed the accuracy of his witness statement, subject to one minor correction. The unique reference number for that statement is WITN 04380100. The statement and the transcript of Mr. Leighton's oral evidence is available on the inquiry's website. We weren't able to conclude his evidence, his oral evidence, on the 17th of April, and I stress that that was through no fault of his. And Mr. Leighton has agreed to the inquiry's request to reattend to answer further questions today. With that in mind, sir, unless you wish to say anything, I would ask that Mr. Leighton be sworn in.
No, that's fine.
Just repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Leighton. Thank you for attending the inquiry again to complete your oral evidence. I want to start by recapping on some of your oral evidence from the last hearing. And so if we could please bring up the transcript of that. It's INQ 401131. And while that's coming up, I'll say I will use 2 page references when referring to the transcript. One, the A4 page reference for the purposes of our document management system, and then the internal page reference as well. So if we could first please turn to page 32. That's A4, page 32. And at page 126, internal page 126, we see there your evidence begins, your oral evidence. Please, can we look at A4, page 35? And at internal page 138, line 22, this follows a question I asked about Post Office Limited issues. I asked, with hindsight, should added to that list be prosecutions of sub-postmasters and oversight of prosecutions of sub-postmasters? And if we could go down the page, please, to page 139. We don't need to read the whole of it, but part of your answer was non-execs are called non-execs because they don't execute. Executives are called executives because they do execute. It's at line 11, sorry. And then carrying on from line 13. So our role, I think, really is to make sure the structures are in place to enable any issue in the business to be raised up the organisation, and therefore you have the executive management team who are responsible do that. You've got all the meeting structures from the Post Office Limited Board to the Royal Mail Board to the Audit and Risk Committee to the subcommittees of all those organisations to the management boards of those organisations that move all the time and over time, and then you go on to talk about have your say. Do you remember giving that evidence?
Yes.
Could we please then turn to page 38? A4, page 38. And then internal page 152, please, at the bottom. Line 7, I asked, what is the non-executive director or non-executive chairman's role in respect of risk management? And your answer says, to make sure that the processes are in place that enable that to happen in terms of risk management. Audit and Risk Committee obviously are a big part of that, but also a lot of risk doesn't just come through the Audit and Risk Committee, it comes from the day-to-day interface you have with people. So the most important thing is to have some set processes to make it clear where the responsibility lies. And again, I think you can see certainly in the Royal Mail pieces of the report and accounts that there were, risk management was built up from the bottom of the organisation. Again, do you recall giving that evidence?
Yes.
So I think summarising your evidence is that a non-executive had responsibility to see that appropriate reporting structures were in place in the group or business.
That's right.
And would that include a responsibility to see that there is appropriate oversight of the group's operations?
Absolutely.
Could we turn, please, to page 40? So I should say A4, page 40. And then at internal page 159, line 13, I asked, well, when was the first time that you were aware that sub-postmasters were prosecuted for offences by a Royal Mail group? I think I was going to say company, and you answered, when I joined the organisation. At internal 160, line 3, it says, were you aware that the decision of whether to prosecute someone or a sub-postmaster was made by a Royal Mail Group company? You answered, yeah. And then at line 7, were you aware that the prosecution was conducted by a Royal Mail Group company? And you answered, yes. Again, do you recall giving that evidence?
Yes.
Page 41, please. Thank you. And down to internal page 63. At line 6, I asked, so you were aware of the prosecutions. Were you aware that prosecutions of sub-postmasters relied on data generated by the Horizon IT system? Your answer was, I'm not acutely aware of it, but it would be obvious that it would be because obviously that was the EPOS system of the branches. And then it says, on an operational level, who or which team did you think was responsible for investigating suspected theft, fraud, or false accounting on the part of sub-postmasters? Your answer, again, I can't recall exactly, but I would say it was in that sort of security/legal area of the business. But the question is, so we have the security team. Where did you think the security team sat in the reporting line within the group? You answered, again, I don't know exactly because I haven't seen the organograms, but I think my recollection is that they worked into the legal teams and that they all worked into the company secretary. Question, so the legal team, where did the legal team sit? And you answered, again, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it reported to the company secretary. The question, the company secretary of which company? Your answer, of Royal Mail Group. Question, so legal was a group function. Answer, yes, I think so, yeah. Again, do you recall giving that evidence?
Yes.
Could we then actually look at line 16 as well, please, of internal page 164. Question again, at the operational level, who did you think was responsible for the decision as to whether or not to prosecute a sub-postmaster? Your answer, I would have, again, I'm not. I have to say within the legal team. Question, so within group in legal? Answer, yes. Question, who did you think was responsible for the conduct of those prosecutions? Would that be legal again? Answer, yes, I think so. And I think it's fair to say that those were all matters that your evidence is you knew those at the time you were chairman. Is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is your evidence that you knew those matters, which we've just gone through, at the time you were chairman?
Largely, yes.
When you say largely, what matters do you think you weren't aware of when you were chairman?
I mean, some of the detail I would think, I need to go back over things, but largely I would have been aware of all those things when I was chairman.
Can we look, please, at A4, page 42? And then internal page 165, line 1, it says, were these matters actively on your mind at the time when you were running the company? Your answer, not at all. Question, why not? And you said, because obviously there were many other things that were being addressed both, and you go on to say what those were. Just to clarify this, is what you're saying was you knew the, as you say, largely the overview of what I've just been through, but it's not something that you actively thought about when you were chairman as to how the process worked?
Absolutely.
We then turned in your evidence to look at the oversight of prosecutions at the group level. I don't need to go through the entire transcript for that. I'll take you to one part. It's A4, page 44, please. And internal, page 73, at line 25. I asked, let's take it in stages. You say that Jonathan Evans, the company secretary, that's the line of report for legal. That's what I think, your answer. I'm not 100%, as I said to you. Question, you said earlier that you thought the decision to prosecute and the investigation of offences, responsibility for that lay with legal. Your answer, yes. Question, at group level, answer, yes. Question, we see that the Audit and Risk Committee of the Royal Mail Holdings Group are exercising oversight of the prosecution of offences affecting Royal Mail. Yes? Answer, yes, but their oversight is on the Royal Mail and Post Office Limited and parcels. The Royal Mail Audit Committee's oversight is across all of the elements of the business. Question, yes, so that's my question. Why, in those circumstances, was the Audit and Risk Committee not exercising the same type of oversight as we see here in respect of prosecution of crime that was affecting Post Office Limited? Your answer, that I don't know. Is it fair to summarise your evidence as this, that the Royal Mail Board in practice did not exercise oversight of the prosecutions of sub-postmasters?
That's correct.
And you don't know, or you couldn't give us an answer as to why that was at the last time?
That's correct. Can
Can you give us an answer today?
No, I mean, it's the same thing. That obviously, at the audit committee, as you saw, some of these issues were discussed, but it seems largely to be across the Royal Mail. And so at no stage really was there any information coming up the organisation that this was an issue or the issue that it was. And therefore, I think that is why it was never really picked up at the audit committee.
Can we look at Post Office Limited's oversight of prosecutions and turn to your statement, please, at page 23, paragraph 44. So you're discussing oversight of legal departments and various other departments. You'll see from the first line. Midway down, you say, I do not recall any discussion during board meetings of the prosecutions that Post Office was pursuing against those sub-postmasters. Is that relating to all boards, Post Office Limited and Royal Mail Holdings?
Absolutely.
Does it also apply to any subcommittees of the boards of either company that you sat on?
As far as I know, yes.
Do you recall having any discussion with any other member of the Post Office executive team about prosecutions?
None at all.
Do you recall having any such discussion with any other post office non-executive director?
None at all.
So during your time as chairman, is it the case that you did not discuss prosecutions of sub-postmasters with anyone?
As far as I can recall, yes.
Actually, if we could please look back at your statement, page 23, paragraph 45. Say, as a general matter, my role as chairman and non-executive director of Royal Mail Holdings was one which involved overseeing and advising on the strategic objectives of Royal Mail Holdings. Pausing there, you were also a non-executive director of Post Office Limited.
Absolutely.
Where issues were raised to board level, I would seek to take an active role in discussing and probing the best course of action. Since litigation was taking place within Post Office, as with other companies with whom I've worked over the years, I would have expected the board of Post Office to be kept up to date with key litigation ongoing in the company. What did you mean by since the litigation was taking place within Post Office Limited?
That's where the interface was. Basically, Pol was in charge of the sub-postmasters. Obviously, they were working with Royal Mail Group, who were doing the legal activity, but I'd have expected both it to come to the board of Pol and, if necessary, to the board of the Royal Mail if there were significant issues in litigation, including litigation against the sub-postmasters, and or any issues that were a cause of that.
Do you accept that oversight of the legal function in Royal Mail Group was to the Royal Mail Group board?
It was through the Royal Mail Group board, yes, but also had an interface with the Pol board because Pol operationally managed that piece of the business. So I'd see it as a joint responsibility.
You say that you would have expected the board of Post Office Limited to be kept up to date with key litigation ongoing in the company, and you go on to say, usually this would include litigation which impacted or had the potential to impact the strategic objectives of the company. I would not have expected to have been briefed on all litigation, but rather those deemed by the executive team to be high cost or have the potential to impact the strategic objectives of the company. Within the business, the responsibility for conducting and overseeing litigation is, in my experience, the responsibility of the company's legal function. When you say high cost, are you referring to the legal costs, the risk of, so what's at stake in the litigation, the amount at stake in the litigation, or both?
Both, and the impact that it may have on the business in a negative sense, from either a revenue or a cost perspective.
And when you say the potential to impact the strategic objectives of the company, what did you mean by that?
Exactly that. If there is anything that would affect the strategic have a strategic impact on the company from wherever it came from, then I'd expect the board to be aware of that. And again, if you look at this particular tragedy, clearly, if there were issues with Horizon in a systemic way, that would not just have a cost impact on the business, it would have a strategic impact on the business, because you would question why we were rolling that system out, because it was the backbone of everything that was happening in the post office. So Horizon was a major strategic activity within the group.
Just looking at the prosecutorial function, reduced to its simplest, this meant that Royal Mail and Post Office would take people to court, and in certain circumstances that would lead to sentences of imprisonment. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And you would have known when you were chairman the very serious consequences of a criminal conviction against a sub-postmaster.
Yes.
You would have known of the very serious consequences of a term of imprisonment against a sub-postmaster.
Yes.
In those circumstances, would you agree that the exercise of the prosecutorial function should have been at the forefront of the Board of Directors' minds?
I'm not sure that it should be at the forefront of the board's mind, but it would certainly should have been in scope. But I go to the same issue which we come to all the time here. The issue was that there was nothing coming to the board from any direction that suggested there was be the scale of the activity or some systemic issue in Horizon that was causing that.
Leaving Horizon to one side, when one of the operations of the company had the potential to lead to terms of imprisonment for members of the group's workforce or past members of the workforce, wasn't it incumbent on the board to take proactive steps to satisfy itself that the prosecutorial process was fair and lawful?
I think the role of the board in this would be to ensure that there were practices and policies and procedures in place and that those were taking place, and then would expect to hear where that was not the case.
So is your evidence the role of the board is to set up the process, firstly? Yes, I think.
Yes.
Secondly, to see that that process is being followed through?
Yes.
And presumably as part of that, it's important that people in the management chain know who is responsible for what.
Absolutely, and not just in the management chain, in all of the functions that we're interfacing in that activity.
And is it the board's responsibility to satisfy itself that people in the management chain and elsewhere, as you describe, knew the remit of their responsibility?
Absolutely.
I want to look at what was considered by the Post Office Board and or subcommittees. Could we please start with Poll 30-21483? It's a meeting of the Post Office Limited Board of Directors on the 20th of August 2003. And we see on the present side, 3 up from the bottom, you're listed as being present. Could we turn, please, to page 8? Under POLB 3/69, it refers to Tony Marsh, who presented a security paper to the board on behalf of David Miller. If you just have a quick skim of that and let me know when you want to go over the page. I don't need to read it onto the transcript.
Okay to move on?
If you could go to the next page, please. That appears to be relating to the security of sub-post officers rather than the investigation and prosecution of crime. Is that your recollection of the meeting, if you have one?
Well, it was a long time ago, so I can't recall, but the way I'd read it, I'd say that's when you read it, that's what it is.
Can we please look at poll 30-21485? that's a year and a bit on in the chronology, the 13th of October 2004. We see, again, 3 from the bottom of the present list. You are present, and it says for POLB 04/86 to POLB 04/97. I assume that means where the references are in between that number, you're present for the meeting. When it's outside of that number range, you aren't there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't recall that, but
So we see that it's up to 97 on the right side.
yeah.
Can we go to page 13, please? So POLB 04/108. So it appears that you wouldn't have been there at this meeting. Would you have read the minutes of the meeting at a later date?
Yes.
It says human resources, and the board noted the report. The board agreed that in situations where fraud had been perpetrated against the company, the appropriate civil orders would be used immediately and in advance of any criminal proceedings. This would help recovery efforts by ensuring that the assets of those involved in criminal activity were quickly secured. David Miller would verify the current procedures and report back to the board. Given this is under the human resources section, can you assist us with whether this is looking at alleged fraud against the post office by its workforce?
I can't recall that.
Do you recall this issue being raised or discussed with other members of the board?
No, obviously a long time ago, so I don't actually recall this. If you ask me to read it, I would. It's difficult to tell exactly who it's talking about.
You weren't aware around this time, though, of the board considering the process of prosecutions. Is that right?
Sorry, I don't.
So with your any conversations you remember with non-executives, it's right that you weren't aware of or told about any discussion at board level about the process of prosecutions.
About the process of prosecution?
Yes.
No, I thought you asked a question whether we knew about numbers of prosecutions. Obviously, this talks about the process of prosecutions.
Let me rephrase it. I asked you earlier if you were ever involved in discussions about prosecutions with members of the board, non-executive directors. My question is, are you aware of any discussion at board level about oversight of prosecutions that occurred when you were not there?
No, I mean, I don't think this is about oversight of prosecutions. This is about, when I read this, what happens when there is a recovery required.
You mentioned numbers of prosecutions before. Were you going to say what were you going to say about that and your knowledge of the numbers?
We had no idea of the numbers of prosecutions that were taking place. That was never raised up.
What was your understanding of the numbers of prosecutions that were taking place at the time?
I had no understanding of the amount of prosecutions taking place at the time.
Did you at any point ask for information on how many numbers? Did you at any point ask how many people the post office was prosecuting?
Not in that set of circumstances. There were discussions at Royal Mail Group about the broader numbers of prosecutions taking place across the group. But to my recall, never a discussion about the number of prosecutions actually taking place in Pol itself.
Could we look, please, at actually, no, before we do, why did you not ask for numbers of prosecutions in relation to Post Office Limited itself and or prosecutions against sub-postmasters?
Because it was never seen as an issue in the organisation. It was never flagged up as an issue, and frankly, there were so many other things going on. Unless it would have been raised, it wouldn't have been picked up. But as you can see in bits of the Royal Mail Group Board where issues were raised, generally there was a discussion. But this was not a priority at the time, which was a mistake.
And is that a mistake because it was a reactive approach to oversight of the process of prosecutions rather than a proactive approach as the board satisfying itself that the prosecutions were being conducted fairly?
Yeah, I think it was reactive, but I think it's the context of it, which is there's many other things happening in the business. This was not seen as an issue, therefore there were clearly procedures that should have been taking place. Clearly there were teams working on this that had the opportunity to flag this up. And it didn't happen. And it didn't happen not just in the organisation. It wasn't flagged up by, from the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, you name it. This was never brought up as a significant issue. And boards tend to react to significant issues.
Could we please look at Poll 21486? It's a meeting on the 15th of December of the Post Office Limited Board. If we go down, we see that you're not in attendance, but as you said before, you would have read the minutes. Could we turn, please, to page 6? I should have said, I think you nodded. When I asked, you would have read the minutes. I think
Yes.
you nodded.
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Thank you. We have an entry about the Risk and Compliance Committee. It says Peter Corbett provided a short presentation to highlight the work of the newly formed Risk and Compliance Committee. The board noted that, if we go over the page, please, the scope of its activity included audit, compliance and legal issues. It says the primary aim was to ensure the service and conformance elements of the business were working together properly. That's D. And then E. The next quarterly meeting would be held on 5th January 2005 to discuss branch control, vital few controls, audit reports, anti-money laundering measures, crime and fraud, and the work of the Group Audit Committee. Do you remember what your understanding was of the remit of the Risk and Compliance Committee within Post Office Limited at this point?
No, I can't recall that.
Did you ever sit on the Risk and Compliance Committee or attend it?
Not as far as I can recall.
Sir Michael Hodgkinson gave evidence to this inquiry. We don't need to bring up his witness statement, but at paragraph 32, he said, I introduced a Risk and Compliance Committee because the board was conscious that it would need to have a greater corporate governance measures in place with the progression into financial market, specifically because of the risk of mis-selling financial products. Can you gainsay what Sir Michael says about the purpose of the Risk and Compliance Committee?
No.
Please, could we turn to... Actually, before we do, sorry. Would this, the Risk and Compliance Committee, in your view, have been a suitable place for oversight of prosecutions to take place? And when I say oversight of prosecutions, I mean against sub-postmasters by the Post Office.
It could be a place, yes.
In order for that to be an effective committee to oversee such prosecutions, what types of attendees would it require?
Again, largely the people that are on that list, I would imagine. that's why it would have been set up that way with those people.
Would it require input from the legal department?
I would imagine so, yes.
Could the Risk and Compliance Committee of the Post Office Limited effectively oversee prosecutions if it was not able to oversee the group legal function?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's of bad information. And the members of the Post Office Audit and Risk Committee and the MD and chairman of the Post Office Risk Committee sat on the Royal Mail board.
Could we please look at poll 30-21490? It's another Post Office Limited board meeting, December the 14th, 2005. If we go down, please. We see you have given your apologies. Could we turn to page 14, please? Just scroll down slightly so we see that's perfect, thank you. We have the Risk and Compliance Committee heading, and it says the board noted the Risk and Compliance Committee's minutes of the 29th September 2005. Would you have read those committee minutes as part of the board pack, even though you didn't attend the meeting?
If they were in the board pack, yes.
Because it says the board noted the minutes, is it likely that those minutes would have been in the board pack?
Probably, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to comment.
Could we look, please, at poll 30-21418? We see the minutes of the Risk and Compliance Committee on the 29th of September 2005. Sorry, just getting my copy. And members, we have Sir Michael Hodgkinson, Peter Corbett, that was the Finance Director of Post Office Limited, is that right?
I think so, yes.
Rod Ismay, who the inquiry's heard evidence from, would he have been head of, or in the branch accounting team at that point?
Again, I couldn't recall that, but
Olwyn Lyons, again, we've heard evidence from the inquiry. The Secretary, Michael Dadra, do you recall working with him?
no, sorry, I don't.
Apologies from Ian Anderson, do you recall working with him?
Not.
Allan Cook, we know and we'll come on to. And Keith Woolard, do you remember him?
Not necessarily a long time ago.
Are you aware if the Post Office Limited Risk and Compliance Committee had any any persons attending with legal experience?
I couldn't tell from that list.
Could we turn, please, to page 6? And if we go to the bottom of the page, it says, Post Office Limited has a principle of undertaking criminal prosecutions for all cases where it is in the public interest, but noting that likelihood of recovery and circumstances of the defendants and the victims may be relevant to that decision. Firstly, after reading that, do you recall whether you turned your mind to whether this committee was overseeing criminal prosecutions?
I wouldn't be able to recall. I mean, I wouldn't know if I saw this document. So it's difficult to comment, really.
Secondly, the point of, but noting that likelihood of recovery and circumstance of the defendants and the victims may be relevant to that decision. The likelihood of recovery as being relevant to the decision of whether a criminal prosecution is in the public interest, is that something that would have struck you as odd when you read it at the time?
Well, I'm not sure I did read it at the time. As I said, I don't recall seeing this document. So I'd only be speculating. To be honest, it's not very clear at all.
Do I take it from this that, to the best of your recollection at the time, you didn't turn your mind to the circumstances in which Post Office Limited would pursue prosecutions?
No.
That can come down, thank you. Could we look, please, at poll 3032210? This is another meeting of the Post Office Limited Board, this time on the 20th of April 2006. And we can see present, second from bottom, you're in attendance, yes?
Yes.
If we can turn to page page 2, please. And then at the top, there's small c. It says, the board noted the minutes of the Post Office Limited Compliance Committee of 22nd March 2006. In view of the increasing volume of regulatory issues, the board considered that it would be beneficial for the committee to recruit additional expertise. The board agreed that Luke March, Compliance Director, Royal Mail Group, should be asked to join the Compliance Committee. Do you recall this discussion or this decision?
No, not at all.
Can you assist us? Is this a fair summary of or a fair reading of what happens here? Firstly, the board is noting an increase in volume of regulatory issues. Yes? You're nodding.
Yeah. I'm waiting for you to finish. Actually, go on.
Regulatory issues. Does that mean compliance, for example, with financial services issues? Is that how you take that?
It could be a number of different things. Regulatory is quite a broad term.
It wouldn't be used to describe prosecutions, would it?
I'm not sure it would.
And the decision is, in light of that, for the Compliance Director of Royal Mail Group to be asked to join the committee. Can you recall ever a similar decision or discussion being made in respect of someone from Group Legal joining the Compliance Committee?
No. Although this is action to Jonathan Evans, who I think Legal reported to. I think Jonathan Evans is on.
So he's the company secretary, and your evidence, as before, was the legal department, Group Legal Department reported to him.
I'm pretty sure it did. So Jonathan would be the legal representative, I would imagine, in this discussion.
My question is slightly different. I think you have answered it, which is, was there a discussion ever at board level of having someone from Group Legal be put on the Compliance Committee at Post Office level? And I think your answer is no. Or you don't recall?
I don't recall. But it looks here as if that's what's happened.
So, sorry, is your evidence that Luke March, as Compliance Director, would be within the legal function?
No, but this is about regulatory. I mean, I'm trying to read it as I said, but this is about regulatory issues. And Luke Marsh, who I don't recall, but compliance generally is broader regulatory issues. So I think this is, when I read this, this is about regulatory issues in the broadest sense. not just about legal issues.
No, I suppose I'll narrow my question further. Do you recall there ever being a conversation about the General Counsel at group level or a member of the Royal Mail Group legal team being asked to sit on the Post Office Limited Compliance Committee?
Not that I can recall.
That can come down, thank you. Is it fair to say that looking at those board minutes, leaving the compliance committee to aside because you didn't sit on that, but at the board minutes, is it fair to say that the Post Office Board didn't exercise active or real oversight of the prosecutions brought by Post Office Limited?
No, I don't think that's correct. I think what would happen is the Post Office Board would have oversight of that activity if the executives on that board felt and knew that there was a significant issue.
So again, it's a case of it's for the executives to, I think your evidence is it's for the executives to raise the problem. Is your evidence that there's no obligation on the Post Office Board proactively to ask about the process of prosecutions?
Generally, the board would ask things proactively if there was an issue, or if somebody had seen some data that flagged an issue.
Is that the general approach to matters, how a board operates generally?
Well, that's a big generalism. No, obviously not. But in essence, the board focuses on what are the key strategic issues facing the business, and then relies on the management teams within those businesses to manage the pieces in their operational areas against the policies and procedures that are put in place to do that. And those things tend to be reported up to the board on an ad hoc basis, generally driven by an issue being raised that means it needs to be brought to the attention of the board. It's a top-down and bottom-up approach.
I'll come back to the questions I asked earlier about the consequences of the criminal process of which you were aware. Because of those significant consequences, do you not think a more active or careful or different approach to oversight was required by the board because of the significant consequences?
Well, obviously at the time, that was not the case. People did not think that. With hindsight, obviously I would change my opinion today. But I think the crucial issue here is that the systemic issues horizon that then impacted the prosecutions of the sub-postmasters was not an issue that was ever raised over a long period of time. And a lot of governance comes from intelligence up the organisation.
Again, I'm going to deal with Horizon shortly. You said with hindsight, the risk arising from prosecutions was known and obvious at the time. Would you agree?
Yes.
Would you accept that the Post Office Board should have, knowing what it knew, exercised more proactive oversight of prosecutions, and it wasn't necessary to have hindsight to do that?
No, I think that what was missing was the level of prosecutions, and what was missing was the impact that Horizon was having on that. And with those two issues would weigh significantly on whether the board, spent time on that particular issue.
I want to look at some of the evidence given by other senior figures within the Royal Mail Group and Post Office Limited to this inquiry. And I'll start with Sir Michael Hodgkinson. He was Senior Non-Executive Director of Royal Mail Holdings from 1st January 2003 until 31st August 2007, and chair of Post Office from May 2003 to March 2007. I'm not asking you to remember the specific dates, but does that broadly sound right to you?
Yes.
You would have worked with him regularly in your role as chairman.
Yes.
So could you just speak up a bit? Was that
Yes, sorry, yeah.
No need to apologise. And from your evidence before, I take it you didn't discuss the oversight of prosecutions of sub-postmasters with Sir Michael. Is that
That I
correct?
can recall.
I think you said not that I can recall.
Yeah.
Could we please bring up Sir Michael's statement? It's WITN 10660100. Came up before I finished the number, very impressive. Could we turn to page 22, please? Paragraph 56. It says, I've been asked about where the responsibility lay in the holdings group for criminal prosecutions and civil proceedings of sub-postmasters for shortfalls in branch accounts. I cannot recall who would have been responsible within Post Office Limited, but my assumption is that this would have been dealt with by the Post Office Limited legal department, who would have reported any issues to the CEO or COO. It goes on to say, I do not recall discussion about the risks and compliance issues arising from the prosecution of sub-postmasters for theft and false accounting, or the pursuit of civil litigation against sub-postmasters to recover alleged shortfalls in branch accounts. As far as I was aware, there was a fully functioning legal team responsible for these actions. And then if we can bring up on screen at the same time, please, Sir Michael's evidence to the inquiry. It's INQ 401128. And if we could go, this is the transcript of the proceedings on the 11th of April 2024. If we could go to page 32. Thank you. Internal page 126 at line 9. Mr. Blake is asking questions and says, putting those three together, did the board, so far as you call, ever receive notice of concerns about prosecutions relating to Horizon or problems with the Horizon system itself? Answer, I was not made aware of those. Question, I'd just like to read paragraph 38.1 of your statement, which addresses the legal department. It says, I do not believe the board had direct oversight or involvement with the legal department. I do not recall the structure of the legal team. This was ultimately the responsibility of the CEO and COO. We saw when we started today the board composition. It doesn't seem as though there was what you might see nowadays, a general counsel. Answer, yeah. Question, someone of an equivalent position. Was there, in your view, any gap in relation to, if we can go down, thank you, oversight of the legal department at the Post Office? I think there was, answer. I think there was, and I think that was part of the fact that some of the functions remain central. Can you expand on that, please? I think we had a subset of the Royal Mail legal department. What was the problem with that? Answer, I think then it wasn't represented on its own right on the Post Office board. Question, did that change at all during your time? Answer, no. And he says, was that something you were aware of at the time, or is that looking back now? Answer, I think more looking back. Did you discuss the oversight of the legal department, the Royal Mail Group legal department? Did you discuss that with Sir Michael at any point?
Not that I can recall.
In circumstances where Sir Michael was chair of the Post Office Limited board and you were chair of the group, and the legal department within the group was providing services to the subsidiary, why didn't you discuss oversight with Sir Michael?
Because we'd have no reason to discuss the oversight.
That can come down, thank you. I'll turn to Adam Crozier, please. He was the Chief Executive Officer of Royal Mail from February 2003 to April 2010. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
He reported to you, is that right?
Yes.
Would you have worked with him closely?
Yes.
And again, from your evidence before, I take it that you didn't discuss the oversight of prosecutions of sub-postmasters with Mr. Crozier.
Yes.
Can we look at his witness statement, please? It's WITN 04390100. Page 14, please. Paragraph 41.1. We see for 41, it's talking about supervision. It says, as far as I can recall, oversight for criminal prosecutions and civil proceedings brought by Post Office would have sat with the Post Office legal team, and oversight for prosecutions brought on behalf of the rest of the group would have sat with the group legal team. And if we can then look at his evidence to the inquiry, it's INQ 401129. If we turn to page 27, please. A4, page 27, please. Scroll down, please. We see Mr. Crozier giving evidence questioned by Mr. Beer. If we could turn, please, to page 35. That's A4, page 35. Thank you. If you can go down to internal page 140. See, the question starts at, or a quote, sorry, starts at line 9. And then from line 21, it says, were you not aware that, in fact, there was no Post Office legal team, it had no separate legal in-house function, and that civil and criminal proceedings were brought by lawyers within the Royal Mail Group legal team? Over the page, goes on to say, answer, I was not, no. Question, so lawyers from within the group gave advice on prosecutions, they made decisions about prosecutions and within prosecutions, and they conducted the proceedings, not any Post Office lawyers. You didn't know that. Answer, was that throughout the whole period? Question, yes. Answer, and I am sorry. Question, throughout the whole of your period? Answer, my period. Question, yes. Answer, I was not aware of that, no. Question, given the facts that I've just described, that would mean, is this right, that your board had a responsibility for the conduct of a team of lawyers within Royal Mail Group who were acting on behalf of the Post Office, rather than the Post Office board having such a responsibility for them, wouldn't it? Answer, in part yes, but also they would be doing that at the behest of the Post Office team who owned Horizon and any issues deriving out of that. Question, well, they might be their clients. Answer, yes. Question, Post Office Limited might be their client. Answer, yes, sorry, yes. Question, I'm talking about responsibility for the conduct and work of the lawyers. That fell, if I'm right, to Royal Mail Group to manage and oversee. Answer, my understanding at the time was that was also under the supervision of the company secretary at the Post Office in conjunction with the Royal Mail, and they used, I thought, a mix of Post Office legal team augmented by Royal Mail legal team and outside legal people as well. That was my understanding. Did you discuss with Mr. Crozier how the legal teams were structured across the group when you were at Royal Mail?
Not that I can recall.
So for that reason, can you presumably you can't assist us with how Mr. Crozier may have come to understand that there was a Post Office limited legal team responsible for prosecutions?
Not at all. I mean, it may be worth... It is not unusual to have... remember, the Royal Mail Group had a number of ancillary companies, Post Office, GLS, Parcel Force, Royal Mail Holdings, the Royal Mail itself. So it's not unusual at all to have a group function at Royal Mail Group, where that group function supports those individual divisions. In fact, it's generally the case in most companies where we have a group set up. So this structure is not unusual. And in the Royal Mail Group legal team, it would also not be unusual for a part of that team to be dedicated to Post Office Limited, and for that team to dotted line into Post Office Limited. So, you know, when I read these responses, they seem to be quite confused, but it's very clear. Royal Mail Group had group functions. Those group functions assisted the divisions that worked within Royal Mail, and that included the legal team supporting Poll with, I think, people who were dedicated to Poll in that legal team. So this is not an unusual structure in any way, shape or form.
Do you not see there being a problem with the Chief Executive Officer of Royal Mail Group thinking that, or not being aware of precisely what the legal team within Royal Mail was doing, namely involved in the prosecution of sub-postmasters for Post Office Limited?
Well, I think that's a question you need to ask the CEO of the Royal Mail. I mean...
Well,
gentlemen, I think I've got the general structure quite a long time ago, and I got Mr. Crozier's evidence that he didn't know about it. Whether he should have known about it is quite another thing.
Mr. Leighton, can I ask you this then? Why is it that you didn't discuss where the Royal Mail Group's legal responsibilities with Mr. Crozier?
Because we'd never raised it as an issue. I mean, it's... just...
Well, again, Mr. Leighton, can I shortcut this?
Yeah.
The impression I get from you is that rightly or wrongly, you did not discuss these issues either formally in a board or informally with anyone else. And the reason you've given me is that because these issues were never raised with you. Now, is that it in summary?
Yes, but also, sir, this point about obviously there's been some confusion with people as to the first piece of confusion was did the Royal people not knowing that Royal Mail carried out these prosecutions, which has been doing for a long period of time, and then secondly the structure of where the legal team sat in Royal Mail and Poll. And what I'm saying to everybody is this structure is not unusual in any way, shape or form. And it's slightly surprising that people didn't know that this was the structure and this is how it worked.
Well, clearly you knew.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to come back, Mr. Leighton, to something you said in your evidence last time, which I repeated this morning, which was the most important in relation to the roles of a non-executive director or chair, that the most important thing is to have some set processes to make it clear where the responsibility lies. The inquiry's also heard evidence from David Mills and Allan Cook. For example, Allan Cook said he wasn't aware of the prosecutorial decision being made in-house until 2009. Do you accept any responsibility for the fact that key figures, Sir Michael Hodgkinson, Adam Crozier, David Mills, Allan Cook, appearing to be confused about the role of Royal Mail Legal and the oversight of prosecutions?
None at all.
Why not?
because it's very clear. It's always, to me, it's all been very clear exactly what that structure is. And these are executives in the business, working full-time in the business. And I'm somewhat surprised that they didn't understand the structure.
So that's probably a good time to take the morning break, because we'll move on to a separate set of topics thereafter.
Can you just, I had assumed that Mr. Leighton's evidence would be completed reasonably quickly, since we dealt with him for a couple of hours. And I'm anxious about the timing for today altogether, if you see what I mean. How much longer do you expect Mr. Leighton to be giving evidence?
Half an hour, sir, if
Right.
that.
Okay, fine. That's fine. Yeah.
I think with the transcriber, it would be better to have the break now.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, sure. So what time shall we resume?
If we could say 11 o'clock, sir.
Fine.
Thank you. Sir, can you still see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. I want to look at a topic about board composition. Would you agree that postmasters, as individual businesses, invested significantly in the post office network?
Absolutely.
Who at board level was considering their interests?
The team that were the poll team, the MD of poll and the chair of poll, and all the other board members of the Royal Mail.
Can we look, please, at poll 30's21487? It's a meeting of the Post Office Limited Board on the 23rd of February 2005. We see third from the bottom, you're in attendance. On appointments of directors, at the bottom of this page, please. It says the chairman, now pausing there, I'm assuming that's referring to Sir Michael Hodgkinson as chairman of the committee rather than you as chairman of
I
Royal
imagine
Mail.
so, yes.
The chairman reported that he'd become aware that a suggestion may have been made by a DTI minister that Mr. Colin Baker, General Secretary of the NFSP, should become a non-executive director of Post Office Limited. After careful consideration, the board agreed that it would reject the proposal if made for the following reasons. Firstly, we can summarise them. Colin Baker's position with the union would be compromised by a closer relationship. Over the page, non-executive director would need to be independent of the day-to-day executive affairs. And then another matter about the Nolan rules. Do you recall that discussion?
I don't recall the discussion, but I can see what the discussion was from this note. Yeah.
At any point, at this point or thereafter, do you recall the board considering whether there should be a sub-postmaster representative on the board?
Not past this particular point, no.
Do you know why that was?
I think for the reasons that are given here. I think these are good reasons why this couldn't happen. There would be a big conflict of interest, and the other piece of this is the Nolan rules are quite explicit on that you need to have a number of criteria, of which parties are quite a significant commercial criteria. So I think this was the right decision and made sense. But also I think it's this point made before, the interests of the sub-postmasters was driven by poll, but also all the members of the Royal Mail Group board. Only this issue, a significant tragedy of the horizon issues and the systemic issues off the back of that, but in support of the post office and sub-postmasters, in my time at the Royal Mail, that was always very significant across the board, both boards.
I can come down, thank you. I want to look at oversight of Horizon. I think you agree, you say in your witness statement that the transaction data recorded by Horizon was used to compile Post Office Limited's management and statutory accounts.
I think so, yeah.
A director of a company is required to prepare a set of accounts that gives a true and fair view of the state of affairs of the company. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So the director must be able to have confidence in the data being used to prepare those accounts.
Yes.
So any allegation of a lack of integrity in the data produced by Horizon would have been a significant issue for both Post Office Limited and Royal Mail Group.
Yes.
Can we turn to your statement, please, page 18, paragraph 35. So my main recollection of the board's, paragraph 35, my main recollection of the board's oversight of the Horizon IT project is that a key focus and repeated discussion point within the board of Post Office Limited related to the timeline and headline content of the project, the cost and its value for the UK government and by extension the taxpayer. This is evident from the minutes provided to me by the inquiry, but I also recall that from the time I began working with Royal Mail Holdings and Post Office Limited was in a difficult financial position and Horizon represented a significant cost. I knew that projects of this nature often took significantly more time than the planned time and cost to implement properly. This was therefore an area that was tested by the board. The company needed a system which was fit for purpose and represented value for money. Do you recall being told anything about Horizon's fitness for purpose when you served on the board?
All of the time. I mean, the most significant thing about this Horizon project, and it's reflected in certainly all the documentation you give me, there's not a board meeting that goes by where it's not talked about. And that's very unusual for an IT system, even an IT system of this scale. So the amount of oversight on Horizon within the organisation as a whole was extremely high.
Would you accept, won't go through them, or would you accept that a lot of the discussion at board level was on the negotiation of contracts relating to Horizon rather than the technical oversight of it?
No, if you read, certainly from the board minutes I've read, a lot of the discussion and a lot of the documentation is absolutely about the enabling impact of Horizon. All of the new releases. I mean, this is a massive IT system with multiple releases, with millions of transactions, which as all these systems have problems and issues along the way. And I feel very confident, and having read all the papers and reminded myself, that the oversight on the project, the Horizon project, was probably more significant than I've ever seen on any IT project.
You referenced releases. The inquiry has heard evidence about the Calendar Square bug, a bug that caused discrepancies in branch accounts, and the inquiry has heard evidence that Fujitsu thought this had been resolved by the S90 release. Can we look, please, at poll 3032210? Board meeting on the 20th of April 2006. If we could please turn to page 10. We can go down to the operations report section, please. We see it says Horizon S90 release. Firstly, sorry, pausing there. It says the board noted the report, and in particular that, where it says noted, does that mean there was any discussion on the report?
I can't recall it such a long time ago, but I would imagine there would have been some discussion on it.
The Horizon S90 release, number 4, provide for a plethora of change requests across a variety of existing capabilities. Do you recall whether or not any questions were asked as to what changes were made to the system, or if there were any bug fixes?
No, I can't. but I do read the release continue to make good progress. There have been a number of issues in the pilot. These have been quickly diagnosed and resolved. And that's what we'd expect to see. We'd expect to see what's actually happening, what's the state of play, if there are any issues, are they being resolved? And that, I think, was the theme of Horizon for a long period of time.
So when you're referring to the oversight and the detailed oversight, you said at board level, this is the type of thing.
This is the type of thing. The next down, network resilience, is a good example. Software necessary to deploy for 2,000 larger branches and solutions of limit the period of time of smaller branches was now ready for implementation. These are significant steps on the evolution of Horizon.
I can come down, thank you. At paragraph 36, we don't need to bring it up. You refer to a visit to Chesterfield, which was where the product and branch accounting was based at Post Office Limited, and you say, although there appear to be some day-to-day issues that the staff in the office were dealing with, I do not recall that there were complaints which indicated major issues with the system. What were the day-to-day issues you were told about?
Again, I can't recall what they were a long time ago, but most of the day-to-day issues were about slow running and some outages and things like that. The major point is this: at no stage in any of the documentation is there any clue that there's a systemic issue with Horizon. And the opportunity for that to arise is significant because there's not a board meeting of the Royal Mail Group or the Post Office Limited where that Horizon is not discussed.
Can we look, please, at poll 20107538? This is a letter addressed to you from Sir Allan Bates on the 7th of August 2003. Paragraph 51 of your statement, we don't need to turn it up. It says, I do not recall receiving these letters and I do not know if I did. To be clear, is your evidence that you cannot remember whether you did, is your evidence that you cannot remember whether you did or did not receive them?
That's my evidence. But it looks more than probable that I didn't because of what happened post. So you can see that it's obviously been passed on to two people in the top right-hand corner. That's not my writing. And then in all the subsequent responses to this, which went over quite a long period of time, about 6 months, I'm not copied in on any of them. So I would say the likelihood is I never saw this letter. But I can't say for definite I didn't.
We see paragraph 3, it says it is again trying to use what seems to be so often described as its outdated Stalinistic management approach in order to bludgeon its will onto the poor sub-postmaster with an issue that could bankrupt every sub-post office in the country. Whilst I appreciate the principle can be expensive, I cannot agree to any position which would leave me and every other sub-postmaster liable for claims of millions of pounds from the post office without any redress or access to data to check such claims. And it goes on at page 3, paragraph 2, to say my personal belief, based on my experiences and from stories I hear, is that the post office are having considerable problems with the Horizon software, and that was especially true in the early days. And that effectively summarises the scandal, doesn't it? Or the problem with that the sub-postmasters were facing.
I think probably, yes. I mean, it's hard to judge, but...
So this letter, who would be handling it on your behalf if you say you didn't see it?
Well, I think it's the people on the... If you look at the top, I
Right.
think then there's a
Page
series
1,
of
please.
correspondence post this from different people who respond to Mr. Bates. I think there's I saw Sir Allan Bates. There's different exchanges between that which go on for quite a long period of time. Lots of different people engaged in it.
Obviously you worked in the at the company. and with the people, do you have any insight, or can you assist us with why a letter like this wouldn't be passed up to you?
Lots of letters would not be passed up to me. You know, I think other people have said the same. We would get hundreds or thousands of letters, and often they would not come to us. They would be handled by one of the complaints department or another department, and we wouldn't necessarily see them. One thing's for sure, if I had seen this letter, then I would have been copied in on the correspondence posted.
Could we please look at poll 20161
I think because I think it's a really important letter. That it is. I think it's also I want to say is that, and I think you've seen certainly in the documentation that the process. There was a process that was taken past this letter, which is the process I'd expect to see, which is somebody responded to it. Another letter came back. There were more pieces of dialogue. I think at one stage an MP got involved. Then to make sure there was not a biased response, I think one of
just pausing there, sorry, Mr. If your evidence is you weren't involved in that process, we can read the documents to see what happened.
No, okay, I'm just saying, but if the process that was then taken on board post this would be the process I would expect.
Sorry, please could we bring up poll 20161 and if we could go to page 8, please. See, there's an email from Karen Arnold to Ms. Hughes, the 2nd of July 2006, asking for an update about Hoylake. Is the sub-postmaster still maintaining his allegations about the Horizon system? I guess if this is still the case, then we won't be able to get it rolled over. If we turn to page 7, please. We see the response. Karen, ex-postmaster, still raises issues around Horizon, hence our inability to reopen. And it goes on, when I reopened Garwin late last year, within a couple of hours of audit, I had to close almost immediately because of a similar scenario. Could we then please go to page 5? Mark Partington's email on the 5th of July. We need to weigh up the cost to the business of the installation at short notice of a new kit and the configuration of this by Fujitsu. Again, against this, we have a closed branch and the loss to the business this is resulting in, and the exceedingly bad PR we will receive if we cannot open this branch in the next week or so. Then, bottom of page 2, please. See an email from John Breeden there, and if we go over the 6th of July, if we go over the page, as I mentioned on the phone today, the chief executive of the local council has written again, seeking assurances this branch will be opened by the start of the Open Golf later this month. I'm pleased to see progress is being made with the recruitment of an interim. It's probably a matter of public record, that's the Open Championship at Hoylake. If we go to page 2, 7th of July, just to advise you, I've been made aware that Allan Leighton has been asked to be kept informed on progress on the reopening. Do you recall what reasons you were given for the post office being closed?
No.
Presumably, whether or not the post office is open or closed isn't something that you would, as chair of the Royal Mail Group, usually get involved in.
No, unless in this particular case, and again, I can't recall this, but what it seems to me, I'm asking about the reopening. So I think somebody's asked a question about, will this post office be open for the golf?
Yes, there's a massive golf tournament going on, which encourages a lot of tourism, and you're being asked when it will reopen.
I think that's what it looks like, yeah.
Surely in those circumstances, would you not ask the reasons as to why the post office closed?
Not necessarily, no.
Why not?
I just wouldn't. I'd be asking the question here about why, you know, when would it be reopened? I'd be addressing the question.
And in order to address that question, you wouldn't have thought it relevant to ask the reasons why it was closed.
No.
If we look, please, at poll 20106867. We see an email from Rob Wilson, head of the criminal law team at Royal Mail. Do you remember Rob Wilson?
Not really, no.
So the 3rd of March 2010, that's after you finished as chair. It says, my understanding is that the integrity of Horizon data is sound, and it is as a result of this that persistent challenges that have been made in court have always failed. And the inquiry's heard evidence of the various challenges that were made to Horizon. Again, is your evidence that you were never informed of any of these challenges in courts?
Absolutely. The systemic issues and some of the bugs that came up since were never brought to either me or the board's attention.
And if the board or the system was operating as you think it should have done, who should have brought those concerns to you in terms of the challenges made in courts?
That should have come up via the operation and the legal functions.
So the operation and legal functions.
Yeah.
So that including the company secretary.
Who would be head, if the company secretary at this stage is 2010, I don't know, was in charge of legal. I've not seen this document, so this is after I've gone, presumably, is it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That can come down, thank you. I've one more point I want to ask you on, please. Could I please have poll 20120833. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And could we go to the risk ops tab? P5 it says at the bottom. The inquiry's seen this before. It's been described as a register of risk with the IT Directorate for Post Office Limited. Would you have seen a document like this at the time?
No.
If we look in the description, the first row beneath that, the description is damage to reputation of Post Office and potential future financial losses if Post Office loses court case relating to reliability of Horizon accounting data at Cleveland's branch office. And then action, Royal Mail Legal Service have made an offer for out-of-court settlement of the case, review with Fujitsu of their processes to protect against similar future cases, and we see the risk is put at £1 million. From your perspective, should that have been raised to the Royal Mail Group board as a risk?
Which one?
The damage to reputation, the first risk, which I just...
But is that being specific about that one branch office, or I'm trying to...
Well, if we say it says damage to reputation of Post Office and potential future financial losses if Post Office loses court case relating to the reliability of Horizon accounting data at Cleveland's branch office. So it's referring to one case, namely the Cleveland's case, but would you accept that it's raising the risk of potential future financial losses?
Well, it is, but the risk that it's got attached to it looks relatively low. So, if you're asking me, would I expect that particular point to come to the Royal Mail Group Board, probably because the level of risk is so low, probably not.
And are you saying, where are you saying that's a relatively low risk?
1 million.
Sorry?
1 million.
I see. So because of the quantification of the risk?
Yes. So the level of risk plays a big part in what comes into the risk thought process.
But the fact that it says that the court case relating to the reliability of the Horizon accounting data, that wouldn't trigger it going higher, your view?
I'd be guessing.
I'm going to ask you a hypothetical. If you had seen this at the time, what do you think you would have done?
Well, I saw in the papers the Cleveland's piece. So if I'd have seen the Cleveland's piece, then that would have raised a real issue.
When you say that, do you mean the advice?
Yes,
the advice
that
of
would have
counsel?
raised a real issue.
And what would you have done having read that advice?
I'd have had a massive dig into everything around it.
That document could come down, thank you. Sir, those are the questions I have. Do you have?
Yeah, I wasn't quite clear about that last answer. Did you say the Cleveland's piece, Mr. Leighton?
Yes, so there in the
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
in the documentation, there's a note on what happened at Cleveland's,
Yeah.
and that basically it was made clear that the prosecution would not succeed because there was a systemic issue in Horizon. And for me, that would have been a significant point.
Right. So that I can understand this, in the Cleveland's case, and this may, just to ensure that we are not at cross purposes, there had been obtained a joint report. It was civil proceedings, not criminal proceedings, and there'd been a joint report from an expert which suggested, and I use the layman's terms, problems with Horizon, which had caused the loss. And as a result, that case was settled by the post office. Now, are you telling me that had you, not necessarily in your capacity as chair of our Royal Mail, but as a senior Royal Mail or post office person, been aware of an expert report which suggested problems with Horizon, and as a consequence, the post office were proposing to settle the case, that is something which should have been taken very seriously and investigated?
Absolutely.
So that is one of the. So when earlier this morning, Mr. Stevens took you to, I'm now not quite sure whether it was a policy or what, but let's call it a policy whereby litigation which was going to cause very substantial financial loss or relate to important policies of the post office should be brought to the board, then this case would have fallen into that category in your opinion?
Absolutely.
Fine. And while we're on that, a couple of years later, Mr. Castleton was sued, as you probably know from press reports, by the post office for a comparatively small sum of money, about £25,000. In that case, he maintained that there were no losses to the post office, that, these are my words, it was all a figment of Horizon rather than being a real loss. And that case was litigated in the High Court. Is that also the sort of case in your view, which should have been raised to the level of the board, given what was involved in it?
I think the answer is yes, sir. I think the Cleveland's one, in a strange way, more so, because it meant that a prosecution didn't take place.
All right.
Yeah.
And I take it that it's your evidence that at the time, namely in 2004, Cleveland's 2006, Mr. Castleton, you and or the board knew nothing about them.
Absolutely, sir.
Fine. Sorry, Mr. Stevens, but I wanted to be clear about that.
Yes, not at all. In fact, I think I should clear one thing up, because I can see the list of documents sent to Mr. Leighton, and can we just bring on screen Poll 20118229? When you were earlier referring to a document on Cleveland's, was it this document?
I think so, yes.
So that being the advice. Thank you. That can come down. So I believe Mr. Steen has 2 minutes of questions. I think that's it, Mr. Steen, with 2 minutes of questions.
Right, over to you, Mr. Steen.
Mr. Leighton, one area whereby information should have been relayed to a board, we'll talk about which board in a moment, could have been via company accounts. So if we think about the situation that was ongoing as we know it within the investigation and prosecution of sub-postmasters, somewhere within accounting there should have been the costs of that system ongoing, costs including the costs of investigators, costs of the actual prosecutions, money coming back another way, which is via the court process, which would include any recovery of monies through those processes, and then through the civil system of investigations, the taking of individuals to the civil courts, the same. One other aspect of costs that we have been hearing about within the inquiry has, of course, been the costs of, on occasions, when there was information requested from Fujitsu to support prosecutions or civil actions, those costs as well. So in that general area of costing, do you agree it would have been somewhere in company accounts?
Not necessarily.
Right. Help us understand why not.
Largely, when those types of issues would be picked up with the auditors. So what tends to happen, you have a discussion with the auditors about what you disclose, what you don't disclose, what needs to be. So I would imagine if and I don't know this, a conversation may well have taken place along that lines, and the auditors would probably have said that that sort of disclosure is not necessary. It is. We're a unique organisation, but it would be quite unique to show that in a set of accounts, I think.
Even though it's a unique situation, or pretty, well, I suppose things can't be just pretty unique, but even though it is a very unusual situation for a company to prosecute its own people, in other words, sub-postmasters, you are saying that you don't think it is likely that it would have had a separate accounting?
I think so, yes.
All right. On a slightly more granular level, there must have somewhere been accounting for those costs within the organisation. It must have existed at some level, do you agree?
Yeah, but probably not in a joined-up way as you described.
Right. So in other words, the individual costs of prosecutions, the number of prosecutions, it must have been known about at some point within the accounting department at...
Yeah, it would probably show in the divisions where that money was taking place. I'm sort of not 100%, but based on what I would imagine, what I know, what I see every day, I would imagine it would show in each cost centre of the individual division that was responsible for that particular piece of activity.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Leighton.
Thank you.
Is that it, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, that's it. So I'm sorry, it's me.
Well, let me thank you, Mr. Leighton, for returning to give evidence before the inquiry. There was unfortunately a long delay between your two appearances, but as I expect you'll have understood, we've been busy hearing from a great number of people, and we couldn't fit you in more quickly than we did. But I'm very grateful to you for coming back and for answering the further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think it would be best to take a 10-minute break now, more time efficient, and then we'll run until lunch. So if I could say we come back at 1:45.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah,
Thank you very much. I'm going to call Mr. Edwards, please.
yeah.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
Declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Can you state your full name, please?
Martin Anthony Edwards.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards, you should have in front of you a witness statement.
Yes.
Could I ask you to have a look at that witness statement? Is it dated the 18th of April of this?
Yes.
Could I ask you to turn to the final substantive page, please? That's page 45. Can you confirm that that is your signature?
It is.
And can you confirm that that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
I believe there's one change that you would like to make to that statement.
Yes.
Can you assist us with what that is?
So, paragraph 23.
Perhaps we could bring it up on the screen. It's WITN 09760100.
So the sentence beginning the reports I refer to,
It's page 8. Paragraph 23. It's about halfway through.
so please could we delete Pol's prosecution process and replace that with the Cartwright-King review. And to explain, at the time of preparing my witness statement, I hadn't seen the Altman advice, and I was relying on a second-hand summary of that advice, which led me to believe the quotes are fundamentally sound referred to the prosecution process in general. Having now seen the having now seen the Altman advice, I understand he was specifically referring to the Cartwright-King review.
Thank you very much. That statement can come down, and the statement will be uploaded onto the inquiry's website. By way of background, after graduating university, you joined the civil service, is that right?
Yes.
Where you worked for about 11 years?
Yes.
I think you worked in the Treasury, UK Financial Investments, the Home Office and the Scottish Government, is that
Yes.
right? Can you assist us with what grade you reached in the civil service?
It was what was known as a grade 7 in civil service terms, so middle management.
You joined the post office in September of 2012, is that right?
Yes.
Did you know anybody at the post office when you joined?
No.
I mean, we've heard from, for example, Patrick Burke and Mark Davis. Both of them previously worked in the civil service or as special advisors. You weren't aware of them before?
No, I hadn't dealt with them in my previous life, no.
And in your role at the post office, you were Chief of Staff to Paula Venables, is that correct?
Yes.
If we could bring up your witness statement onto screen, please. And if we could start at paragraph 4, you've set out the role that you played, your evidence as the role that you played. Begins at paragraph 4, at about halfway down. You say as follows, you say, a major part of the role involved coordinating and editing numerous briefings, reports and correspondence, either going to Paula Venables, for example, to prepare her for meetings, or being issued from her, such as letters to external stakeholders or updates to the Post Office Board. The substance and technical detail for these documents would typically come from the relevant SMEs, that is, that subject matter experts,
Yes.
for the topic in question. And my role was to edit this information to ensure the end product was suitably clear and succinct for the target audience. If we move on to paragraph 31, which can be found at page 11, you say in broadly similar terms, my role as part of Paula Venables' office was to A, ensure the briefing was provided on time to inform the engagement, B, edit the document to ensure that it covered an appropriate amount of detail, taking into account the target audience's time constraints, and C, make sure that it was clear and succinct. When the topic was not entirely familiar to me, I would prepare the draft briefing paper, then send it to the subject matter expert to check that the important messages had been captured correctly and comprehensively in my summary. Turning to paragraph 50. That's page 22. You say, my involvement with the Post Office's preparation for and response to the second site interim report was consistent with the responsibilities of my Chief of Staff role. As noted above, my role was primarily one of a conduit to collate information from the relevant business leads and SMEs, then to synthesize such information into accessible form for Paula Venables, the board, or other audiences. Moving on to paragraph 99. That's page 44. Again, similarly, I was not the subject matter expert on any particular issue, nor did I have any substantive decision-making accountabilities. So it seems from your statement that your role was principally one of a conduit, that you relied on subject matter experts and that you didn't have decision-making accountabilities. Is that correct?
Yes.
Moving now, that can come down, thank you, to the initial months in your post. You became aware of the Computer Weekly interest in matters relating to Horizon quite early on. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, very soon after I joined, I was asked to join Paula in a meeting with James Arbuthnot and Allan Bates for an update on the second site investigation. I think that was within 2 weeks of me joining, so as part of getting ready for that meeting, I was brought up to speed on the issues.
Thank you very much. Sorry, one matter that I forgot to ask you about. After your Chief of Staff position, you moved in 2014 and you became Group Strategy Director, is that right?
Yes.
And then you have worked in various other roles since then at the Post Office, and you are still employed by the Post Office.
Yes.
And what role do you currently have?
I'm currently Network Strategy and Delivery Director.
Does that involve liaising with sub-postmasters?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to my first document, which is relatively early on in your time at the Post Office. It's a January 2013 email. Could we please turn to poll 00380018? So by this time, you've had a meeting with Second Sight and James Arbuthnot and Allan Bates. And presumably you joined at a time when those kinds of issues, the Horizon issues, were rather prominent in the company.
Yes, they were, yes.
29th of January 2013. This is an email from Mark Davies, Communications Director, and he says as follows. He says, as we move towards a greater degree of coordination around stakeholder engagement and public affairs, we need as a business to work more effectively at bringing together our collective knowledge, particularly in the government space. Were you aware of a greater degree of coordination taking place in the business at this time in respect of the public responses to matters such as Horizon?
I think this email and the driver for it partly related to the Horizon matters, but I think it was broader than that. There were lots of interactions underway with government at the time, funding negotiations, seeking to win new business from government, discussions around the future of the network. So I think the drive for greater coordination was across all of those fronts.
And was there a greater centralisation of company messaging?
There was certainly a desire for greater coordination. Lots of different bits of the business might come into contact with governments, and I think there was a desire from the communications team to bring some more coordination to that.
Key to this is a degree of discipline around planning of meetings and coordination of messages at such meetings. Being more aware of what meetings are being held and when will enable us to ensure the right messages are delivered and that we can ensure clarity of messaging. There is real reputational risk at play when we don't have this oversight. It then says further down, alongside this, we're developing more disciplined and coordinated approach to briefing materials, and it sets out who's responsible for that. And then it goes on to say, I will go into more detail on this when I update the executive committee on the wider changes to our communications approach. But as first step, I'd be grateful if I could ask your office and your team to ensure that all government and other stakeholder meetings are communicated in advance, that short readouts of all such meetings are sent to those two individuals for appropriate cascade. And this was sent to you, presumably as part of Paula Venables' team at that time.
Yes.
Could we please turn now to poll 3097786? Moving now to March of that year. This is an email from yourself to Mr. Davis. And you say as follows. You say, would be good to have a quick word in the morning about MP handling regarding the Horizon investigation. Paula asked me on Friday morning whether I still thought it was a right call that we should not attend the meeting with Arbuthnot & Co. I said yes on balance, but it might be sensible to get a separate opportunity for her to engage directly with the relevant MPs, given that she was persuasive and convincing in explaining that we're taking this all seriously and are changing the culture of the post office. So there was due to be a meeting of members of Parliament with James Arbuthnot, and the decision had been taken that Paula Venables shouldn't attend that meeting. Is that right?
Yes, as I recall, yeah.
Yes. I said I'd discuss with you, and you say at the bottom, looking at the list, Tessa Munt is obviously a good friend of ours and fan of Paula. I wondered if it was worth Paula speaking to her before the meeting to feed in our side of the story. Although not without risk, so I'm unsure, let's discuss. Now, in this email, you're not synthesizing, you're not gathering the views of subject matter experts. It does seem as though you are playing a role in the advising Paula Venables about her attendance at a meeting. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that's a fair summary. Yes, that would be part of the role.
And part of your role, it seems, having been in the civil service, I think you had a fair understanding of members of Parliament, and perhaps that was an area in particular that you considered you were able to advise on.
Yes, probably more so on the government side than the parliamentary side. I think Mark Davies would have more experience on the parliamentary side, but yes, I certainly brought experience of government issues.
So when we read your statement and those passages that I've just been taking you to, where you set out your role, can we add to that you did advise Paula Venables in respect of certain matters?
Yes.
Can we please turn to poll 000987777? If we could start with the bottom email, please. This relates to the handling of Second Sight before the interim report is published. And this is an email from Ms. Venables to you. And she says as follows: Martin, I wondered if you had any further thoughts on James Arbuthnot. You were looking thoughtful throughout the meeting, although I didn't get the sense you were holding back. You asked some good questions. Can you assist us? What was the meeting that was taking place at this time?
I think the meeting was particularly to discuss, I think it was about this time that the 2 bugs which were disclosed to the second site report had been shared with the executive team. As I recall, it was a meeting with the likes of Leslie Saul, Allan Lyons, Mark Davies and Paul Eyre. The primary purpose of the meeting, as I recall, was to get more detail on those bugs and understand the detail behind them. But I think the meeting then moved on to the wider progress of the second site investigation.
And if we scroll up, we can see your response. In the second paragraph, you say, my only other concern at the meeting was around the feasibility of some of the options/levers that we raised. As discussed, we need to think about a plan B, given the likelihood that James won't agree to delay the meeting/report. So at that point in time, there was discussion over whether the interim report itself could be delayed or not published. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, a range of options were raised in that meeting, yes.
We also need to be very careful not to overplay our hand with Second Sight. They could turn out to be quite dangerous if we threaten them with legal action or attempt to replace them with another firm. Easy for this to be portrayed in the media as heavy-handed tactics because we don't like their findings. It plays directly into the existing perceptions that we're trying to counteract. So it seems as though you are also advising Paula Venables in relation to media handling.
I mean, less media handling of issues generally, she would sometimes ask for my advice on, yes.
So I think we're stuck with the softer option of explaining to James Arbuthnot calmly but firmly why he cannot allow Second Sight to disseminate a misleading interim report. It either needs to be delayed or repositioned as a very neutral status update with more detail on the one case that has been resolved. He can't allow Second Sight to disseminate a misleading interim report. What was misleading about the interim report?
So we hadn't seen the report at this stage, but the team which were working directly with Second Sight were concerned about the direction it could go. There was the impression conveyed by the team was that there was a risk they might make statements before all of the evidence had been gathered. There was a lot of pressure from parliamentary stakeholders to get a report out before summer recess, and there was a concern that that report wasn't going to be fully evidence-based.
It seems as though you have formed the view, though, in this email, that it was going to be a misleading interim report. If that's the case, where did you form that view from?
So I don't think, I hadn't formed that view independently. That was the concern being conveyed by the team working with Second Sight. The team were concerned about that risk, and a range of options have been discussed about how to handle that. I think I was steering the conversation away from some of what felt to be more overly aggressive options.
What was your personal individual knowledge about what the interim report was likely to say?
I was wholly dependent on what the team were briefing us on this. I had no direct insight into the reports.
And who was the team?
So the team closest to it's Susan Crichton, Simon Baker, Leslie Saul, Allan Lyons.
The passages that I took you to in your witness statement earlier about the involvement of subject matter experts, this is you giving advice to Paula Venables in relation to handling James Arbuthnot, handling Second Sight. There's no direct involvement here of any subject matter experts, is there?
No, not in this specific email, but it's a follow-on from a meeting with the subject matter experts.
And who would you consider the subject matter experts in relation to the matters being discussed here are?
So I think on the contents of the second site report itself, it was the team who were directly interfacing with them.
And who's that? The names you
The
mentioned.
names I just mentioned before, yes.
Could we please turn to poll 3098778? Thank you. So very similar time. This is the day after that email exchange. And if we scroll down, we can see that Gareth Jenkins emails Leslie Sewell attaching his witness statement from the earlier Seema Misra case. He says this was heard in Guildford Crown Court in October 2010 and concerned West Byfleet Post Office. Page 14 covers my response to a problem that had been identified in an earlier case, that involving Lee Castleton, who took the post office to court for unfair dismissal, which he lost. Do you need me to dig out any more on this? I think the key point is that the fact that Horizon did have bugs has been discussed in court, and the post office still won the case. If we scroll up to the top, we can see that Leslie Sewell emails a limited number of individuals, Alban Lyons, yourself, and Mr. Davis, on a FYI basis. Why that small number of people? What did you, the three of you, have in common that needed that information drawn to your attention?
So again, I think this was a follow-up to, it was about this time that the two bugs which were disclosed in the second site report, and I think what was known as the Falkirk bug, the earlier bug, had been shared with the executive team, and Leslie in particular was tasked with getting more detail and background on these. I think she reached out to Gareth Jenkins for particularly on the Falkirk bug. So I think this was a follow-up to that action and conversation.
And why to you?
I was part of that, group discussing how we respond to the second site reports. I'd been in that earlier meeting, which Paula had asked me to join.
What did you know about Gareth Jenkins at that time?
Nothing at all at that time.
Did you ask Leslie Sewell, who is this? What's this all about?
I don't recall any follow-up conversation to this. I mean, I saw his role description at the bottom of the email, described as a distinguished engineer at Fujitsu, and kind of took it from that he was the relevant experts on this topic.
At this point in time, had you had any discussions with Paula Venables about Gareth Jenkins?
No.
Could we please turn to poll 3098806? This is the same day. The top email is from Mark Davis, again to the small group, and he says, this is massively important. Is there any possibility that all incidents, 14 and 64, those are the two bugs that you've mentioned, have been referenced in court? So Mark Davis seems to have seen it as massively important, possibly because it showed that the Post Office had previously disclosed the existence of a bug in a court case. What did you do to familiarise yourself with those underlying issues?
I don't recall any specific action myself. I think there'd already been the action underway to get more detail about the bugs themselves. And if I recall off the back of this, the legal team were tasked with understanding what had been disclosed previously in court cases. I don't recall seeing a follow-up to that.
There's then a meeting with James Arbuthnot on the 3rd of July, so soon after. I'm just going to begin by taking you to the 2nd of July. Could we please start with poll 00190092? By this stage, you are part of a group who is drafting a briefing for Paula Venables and Annis Perkins, I think in relation to a discussion with James Arbuthnot. Do you remember that brief?
Yes.
Thank you. If we look at the bottom of the page, we can see an email from Susan Crichton to yourself and to Mark Davis as well. And it's sent from, it says, Alwyn and Susan. And they say, Susan and I have pulled this together with help, so it's now over to you to work your magic and send on the final document to Paula, Alice and me tonight. So this is, I think, the day before the meeting with James Arbuthnot. If we scroll up, we can see your first response, and you say as follows. You say, on the prosecution section of the brief, there is a half-finished sentence, see below. What were you planning to say? Was this going to cover the issue around previous convictions? If not, what is our best possible defence against the suggestion that this process had called into question the validity of previous prosecutions? I think we definitely need a line on this. So at this stage, you were aware that there was a concern that had been raised that the second site's findings could potentially call into question the validity of previous prosecutions.
I was aware it was a question which James Arbuthnot had raised in previous meetings with Paula, so it felt necessary to ensure she had a position to take on that.
Not just a position to take, but a defence against that suggestion.
Yes, I mean, informed by... So at this point, we hadn't seen the final report, but the preliminary view from Susan Crichton and the legal team was there was nothing at this stage to expect that it would change the safety of previous convictions.
It then says, on the first bullet below, presumably we should add a sentence to state that where it is clear that the Horizon system isn't the issue at stake, we have a duty to protect public money by pursuing appropriate action, and this is why some prosecutions are still happening. Presumably there is some kind of reasonableness test here, i.e. a sub-postmaster can't just get off scot-free by saying it's an Horizon issue irrespective of the circumstances. And then below that it has the section that had been drafted and that had been sent to you. And that reads as follows. Prosecutions. Where cases have been referred to second sight via JFSA, these are subject to the immunity agreement. Where we have investigated sub-postmasters since the start of the second sight work, and the sub-postmaster has said that the Horizon computer system has been key to the issues that have arisen in the branch, we have not taken action against the sub-postmaster. So the immunity agreement was, if a case was lodged with second sights, there would not be a prosecution.
Yes.
And then it continues, where the post office takes legal action against A, and then, sorry, if we scroll up, that hadn't been completed in the draft that you received, is that right?
Yes, so that was the sentence I was querying with Susan and asking her to complete it.
And then if we scroll up, we can see Susan Crichton saying to yourself and others, Hugh and I are just discussing, we'll get back to you shortly. We can see a continuation of this issue at poll 00190-132. Thank you. Now, we have to be a bit careful reading this email. If we scroll down, the best way to read it is to begin with Susan Crichton's email, which is the final email on the substantive email on the page. And then she has made comments below on the original email. So she says as follows. She says, Martin, following your conversation with Hugh, he and I have discussed and think that this is best wording we can use, see below. The bottom line is that this dialogue and resulting potential publicity could increase the risk of appeals being made against previous convictions. We have no reason to believe that these appeals would be automatically successful. We would have to deal with each on a case-by-case basis. There would be significant cost implications. It's interesting that neither of us can think of one. So it seems though she is outlining there to you that there is an increased risk of appeals, and although they wouldn't be automatically successful, they'd have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Yes.
And then if we scroll down, we can see how she has filled in that prosecutions section. It now reads, where cases have been referred to second sight via JFSA, they are subject to the terms of the immunity agreement, which allows non-MP generated cases to be put before the JFSA and or second sight. For criminal prosecutions, we treat each matter on a case-by-case basis with an investigation and legal review, generally involving external lawyers. We have a duty to protect public money and take appropriate action to safeguard such public money. In the event that any person considers that there has been a miscarriage of justice, they have the right to apply to the Court of Appeal to have their conviction reviewed. We can see your response on the first page. You say, thanks both. On the point about current investigations/prosecutions, that's a significant weakening of the reassuring line we discussed earlier. Can we add something along the lines of, since the start of the investigation, we have not pursued action against our postmasters where it is apparent that the Horizon system may be involved? Just pausing there, where did you get that information from?
I think it had been conveyed to me by Susan and Hugh.
Second paragraph says, and on past convictions, if pushed, can we say that we're not aware of any cases where we believe an appeal would now result in a different judgment? But clearly we need to take these on a case-by-case basis. Difficult not to say something like this. What research had you undertaken to be able to draft both of those lines?
So these were, as I referred to in the earlier emails, there'd been conversations with Hugh and Susan about the preliminary interpretation of the implications of this. So this wasn't based on personal research, this was based on the messages I'd been given to them earlier.
But the message is below, though, isn't it? The message is from Susan Crichton below. If we scroll down, we can see what she says. She says, the bottom line is that dialogue and resulting publicity could increase the risk of appeals being made against previous convictions. We have no reason to believe those appeals would be automatically successful. We'd have to deal with them on a case-by-case basis. And she has amended the wording with some more balanced and neutral wording over the page. And your comment there, if we scroll up slightly, for example, on the past convictions, can we say that we're not aware of any cases where we believe an appeal would now result in a different judgment? Where did you get that information from? I mean, you've said that you spoke to subject matter experts and that you relied on subject matter experts. Susan Crichton is the subject matter expert. You're proposing amending wording. Where did that come from?
Well, I'm asking her the question. In her covering email, I think if we could scroll back up to it.
Down, I think.
Sorry.
Yes.
I think I took this covering email and the previous dialogue as quite reassuring. She includes the words, we have no reason to believe that those appeals would be automatically successful, and goes on to say it's interesting that neither of us can think of one, which translates to mean neither of us can think of grounds for a successful appeal. So that covering email was reassuring, and all of my dialogue with Susan and Hugh, which preceded this email exchange, had been quite reassuring and strong on this point. And it felt that Paula was clearly going to be pushed quite hard on this point in the meeting of James Arbuthnot. So I'm basically asking the team to give us the best line they felt comfortable with.
But you're changing the line that she has provided you with.
I'm asking, can we say what you've said elsewhere and in your covering email?
If we scroll up, we can see you're also communicating thoughts from Mark Davis. You say, Mark just raised a similar point with slightly different suggestion on language. And I think, are you quoting below from Mark Davis, or is this...
Yes, I think that text in the darker font is a cut and paste from an email from Mark.
So it seems though Mark Davis had said, do they need an if-pressed line on miscarriages of justice? Nothing has emerged in this report to suggest a wrongful conviction. Cases have been through the judicial process, and we have never relied entirely on Horizon in any court case. Your witness statement refers throughout to reliance on subject matter experts, but it does seem as though we have the head of communications here and the chief of staff drafting quite significant lines to take. Do you agree with that?
I'd agree. We're absolutely iterating the lines to take with the subject matter experts. I personally wouldn't have put anything into a brief. I wouldn't have amended something as significant as this in a brief without checking back with the relevant subject matter experts and ensuring they were comfortable with this.
Okay, so
we are...
before the final version is agreed, you would go back to the subject matter expert and consult them and ensure that it's accurate and fair.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, all of this, as you can see, is unfolding quite late at night, the day before the meeting, so it's kind of very much happening in real time. But what I'm not doing is unilaterally altering the brief and putting it direct to Paula. I'm iterating it with the input of the legal team.
So Susan Crichton, there being the subject matter expert.
Yes.
And you're relying on her to ensure that the changes you're making are accurate.
Yes, that they are comfortable with the position we're taking.
Thank you.
And to reiterate, I'm not, and any of those suggestions on wording, they're not things which I have invented. They're things which have come either from the preceding emails from Susan or the preceding dialogue.
We can continue this chain. There's a separate chain, I think, with Mr. Davis. Could we please turn to poll 002974040? So this email, the top one, I think, 10:41 at night. So this is a late night discussion. If we could turn to the third page, please, of poll 002974040. Page 3, we have an email from yourself, just above one from Mark Davis. Thank you. So you write here, thanks. Questions/comments below, current draft attached. So far, I've only reworked the summary box, but that's the key section, I think. So we're now at 11 o'clock at night. We have below Mark Davis's email, but again, we'll have to read that a bit carefully because that's his email, but with your comments within it. So if we scroll down, he says, current version is pretty weak. The speaking note needs to be firmer. We want to make clear our position and underline our view that no evidence to support the systemic failures. It should specifically address the BBC point, and I think this is your wording in capitals, is it?
Yes.
What point should we make? Grateful for some words. A really key point is that we should not guarantee to agree our media lines with James Arbuthnot. If he comes out strongly, as it sounds as though he will, we will have no choice but to come back strongly. So I'm concerned about the line where it talks about agreeing media statements, and you say, so should we remove this altogether? Difficult to ask for his media statement without offering to share ours. He then says there needs to be a line in there about Fujitsu, if there isn't currently. Your response, what line? He says, I think it needs to be upfront in addressing the issue where James Arbuthnot is said to be angry at the prosecutions and the new evidence. On training, we need to be very careful about language. The current version is too loose. This is your point about not leaving any glimmer, which suggests that cases might need to be reopened. So he says this is your point about not leaving any glimmer, which suggests that cases might need to be reopened. What was your point there about not leaving a glimmer?
I mean, I don't recall specifically saying that, but I guess the general concern at the time, this was clearly a major question for James Arbuthnot. He had raised the question of past convictions. The emerging advice we were getting from the legal team at the time was, as we've seen, that they didn't see grounds for, yes, there may be more appeals, but they didn't see grounds for, let's say, successful appeals. And I guess what we're anxious to do is to avoid raising expectations externally on the basis of the interim report hadn't even been published yet. So it's about managing expectations.
Not leaving a glimmer is about managing expectations, is it?
Managing expectations on the basis of the evidence we had at that point and the emerging interpretation of what that evidence meant.
And he says, so we need to acknowledge that training can always be improved rather than our training must be improved, important difference, and need to follow that with further statement that there's no evidence of systemic failures. The brief needs to make clear that none of the 14 or the 62, those are the two bugs mentioned in the interim report, impact on the spot reviews in the interim report and are therefore not relevant to the interim report. We shouldn't call the user group a Horizon user group. Makes it appear we are acknowledging issue with Horizon. Branch management user group, and you suggest, can we call it an Horizon support user group? So you're there discussing how to rename the group so that it didn't sound like it affected the computer system. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you send final version to me before it goes wider so I can go through one more time? We'll look back on notes to see what missed. Overall, it didn't feel to me that it captured Alice's views, and I think she was right to be so clear. It may be worth setting out 3 overall rocks for the two of them to return to. The first rock being there's no evidence in the interim report to suggest any systemic failures. Second, this is a system which deals with 6 million transactions a day or more than 40 million a week, etc. We must be satisfied that when the report is released, it truly reflects the position. The post office business is too important to too many people for faith to be questioned unfairly. Another point which needs bringing out is the public money point. And then a further paragraph, and this is the kinds of figures that we've seen in a number of lines over the years, many convictions over what period compared with what number of transactions in 11,800 branches, etc. If we scroll back up now to the previous page, in fact, if we start on the second page, Mr. Davis has seen a further rewrite from yourself. We're now at 11:38 at night. He says, I think the main body, we really need to emphasise more that there's no connection between the 14 and the 64 and the spot reviews. Is that possibly two prosecutions, so no link to the prosecutions?
I think so, yes.
Do they need an if-press line on miscarriage of justice? Nothing has emerged in this report to suggest a wrongful conviction. Cases have been through the judicial process, and we've never relied entirely on Horizon in any court case. That's the comment I think that you made in the other chain, isn't it?
Yes.
I'd like to use the bit at the bottom of my email, reproduced here for ease of reading, and his repeated And if we scroll down, there's another email from him that was slightly earlier. Could we please now turn to page 1? And the bottom email there is from yourself. You say, many thanks, I will integrate your language below, which is spot on. Exchanging phone calls / emails with Susan and Hugh to try and pin them down on the prosecution's point. I agree, we need something fairly clear if pressed on miscarriages of justice. The whole brief needs rewriting, infuriating. And if you scroll up, we can see there's a discussion about whether you're doing it now. Sorry, if we scroll down slightly. Mark Davis emails you to say, are you doing it now? Doesn't seem right. I'm happy to have a go if you prefer. So this is almost at midnight. The two of you are together rewording it. And your response, sorry, just saw this, not ignoring you. Yes, I'm doing it now. You're after midnight now. It's 12:17. Not right that either of us should have to rewrite so significantly at this time of night. So it seems as though between the two of you, you are significantly rewriting the wording that was sent to you by the subject matter experts. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's fair, yes.
As it happened on this particular day, the inquiry has seen evidence. I don't need to take you to it. The reference is poll 003809885. This was the day where there is another email distribution relating to non-emotive language for the use of bugs, and the response from Ms. Venables is exception or anomaly. Do you recall that exchange?
I do, having seen it come up in other hearings, yes.
Yes, and you were a recipient of that email?
Yes.
So quite a lot is going on this particular day before the James Arbuthnot meeting.
There is, yes.
Could we please turn to poll 001458089? Did you sleep at all that night? It seems as though it was a particularly late night.
It was a late night, yes.
Because I think the actual final lines were circulated quite early. In fact, if we look at poll 001458089 and we look at page 2, we can see that you send it through at 2:04 in the morning. Alice, Paula, with many thanks to Susan, Alwyn, Mark, and everyone else involved, here's the briefing note for the meeting with James Arbuthnot. And if we scroll down, we can see the speaking notes. So that it's been sent in a Word document, but also a PDF, and it's copied below, brief for meeting with James Arbuthnot, 3rd of July. If we scroll down, we see speaking notes. If we carry on down to the 3rd page, 4th page even, we see there's a section on current prosecutions. There we go. I'm just going to read a few passages out from that briefing. So this is the final version that's sent to Paula Venables. Current prosecution. Since the start of the second site investigation, we have not pursued a criminal conviction which relies solely on Horizon computer system evidence. We have also put on hold civil recovery proceedings in certain cases while we wait for the final report. As you know, we have prepared an immunity agreement with the JFSA to provide reassurance to sub-postmasters thinking of submitting evidence to the process. So those are the kinds of lines that we saw earlier in that earlier draft about the immunity agreement. But in cases where it's clear that the Horizon system isn't an issue, we have a duty to take appropriate action to safeguard public money. For criminal prosecutions, we treat each matter on a case-by-case basis with a detailed investigation and legal review, generally involving external lawyers. And then there's a section on historical convictions. And it's this passage, I think, that formed the final version of what was being discussed. It says, nothing has emerged from the interim findings given to us by Second Sight which would point to specific convictions being unsafe. Cases have been through the judicial process, and the court considers all relevant evidence, not just that relating to the Horizon computer system. In the event that any person considers that there's been a miscarriage of justice, they have the right to apply to the Court of Appeal to have their conviction reviewed. Over the page, we have a heading System Exceptions, so that is in line with that email correspondence about, we see here exceptions and then in brackets anomalies. Under the current Horizon system, we know of 2 of them. Key point to note is that in both cases, our processes picked up these issues, appropriate remedial action has been taken, and they did not lead to any disciplinary action against affected sub-postmasters. Absolutely no reason to believe this means there are other undiscovered issues. Could we please turn to the first page? And if we scroll down to the middle email, please. Paula Reynolds has thanked you for it. And you say, I think sharing with BIS, that's the Department for Business, would be helpful. I know they would certainly appreciate it. I'll just reread to check for any issues which could be misinterpreted or unhelpful to our position. But otherwise I'll forward, unless anyone objects. Just pausing there, unhelpful to our position. The Department for Business were your sole shareholder. What might it be that would be unhelpful to your position?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think I was making the... Paul had suggested that we forward it on to the BIS team. I'm not sure I was referring to any specific risks. I think I was just conscious this is a brief which should have been prepared for an internal audience rather than the BIS audience. Kind of obviously I want to check it was also suitable for the BIS audience. The types of issues which, I mean, there were concerns at the time around the progress of the investigation, how long it had taken, how long it was going to take going forwards, the costs involved. So I think I would have wanted to check that everything that was in the brief was consistent with what we had briefed the BIS team on, or was there anything in particular which we need to explain to them.
But what was the position? Why might it be unhelpful to your position? Did you have a particular position in respect of the Department for Business?
I'm not sure what I was referring to specifically there. I think it was the whole conduct of the investigation, what we had found from it so far, what the next steps were.
You then say that you'll send it to the Executive Committee on behalf of Paula. Now could we turn to the top email, please? This is a response from Susan Crichton, and she says, "Hi there. So I've not read the reworked document. Are you happy that there are no hostages to fortune? We shouldn't send Rod's note as there is updating required." So earlier your evidence was that you would have consulted with the subject matter experts before finalising. It's clear here the lawyer, who is to some extent a subject matter expert, hasn't in fact read the briefing. It's been drafted very late at night between yourself and the head of communications and sent to the CEO, potentially going to the Department for Business and the Executive Committee. That's problematic, isn't it?
I mean, I think it's fair to say clearly the whole last-minute construction of this brief was very far from ideal. It's not the right way to be constructing briefs on such important topics. What you saw in the early email exchange was the iteration of specific topics. I know alongside the email exchange, there were also telephone calls, and I think I referred to them in my email, particularly with Hugh. And I think we saw in the final briefing that the wording particularly on past prosecutions, had evolved from the suggestions stroke questions in my email exchange. So I can't recall the exact sequence, but I think there clearly had been iteration and input from a combination of Susan and Hugh. So I would completely admit this was a far from ideal way of constructing a brief and getting it properly signed off. It was far too last minute, but they had been involved in the process.
It's not just the timing, though, is it? It's the people as well. I mean, in your witness statement, you've been very careful to set out that you were a conduit, that you edited things for clarity. But here we have, late at night, between yourself and the head of communications, a significant reworking of a briefing. And it's very clear here that it hadn't been seen by the subject matter expert, the final version. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, she clearly hadn't reread the whole reworked document.
Are we to read into your witness statement an additional line that is that your role also involved deep involvement in briefing Paula Venables in relation to matters affecting the Horizon system?
So I was absolutely at points in time involved in pulling together and editing briefs which went to Paula on the Horizon system. I don't believe, whilst it involved a significant rewrite, I think a lot of that would have been around how the brief was structured, the clarity of the messaging, how the key points were highlighted in the brief. I don't believe I would have been unilaterally changing the substance of what was contained in the brief without that being signed off by the subject matter experts.
But we saw the communications with Mark Davis, complaints about how weak it was in certain points, needs to be firmer. You were strengthening up the wording, weren't you? Not just making it clearer, but also strengthening it and
I mean, yes, there was clearly
nuance.
yes, there was clearly some substantial input from Mark on the wording.
Mark and yourself.
I'm holding the pen on the overall brief. I think a lot of the specific wording changes came from Mark.
And would you describe Mark as a subject matter expert?
Clearly not on legal affairs and IT affairs. Yeah.
And was it appropriate for somebody with expertise in communications to be so heavily involved in drafting such a brief?
I think it was appropriate for the communications director to be involved in the iteration of the brief. It wouldn't be appropriate for the communications director to fundamentally change the message of the brief without the subject matter experts being comfortable with that.
I'm going to move on to Second Sight and the report and the response. Could we please turn to poll 000999021, please? We're now at the 5th of July. If we could turn to the second page. Paula Venables has circulated a brief email to update the recipients on where we are on the Second Sight investigation. And if we turn to the first page, you have drafted, presumably from what she sent you, but also from discussions. If we scroll up to the top, a suggested draft email to the board. Do you recall how you came about drafting this email to the board?
Well, I mean, it was consistent with part of my role would be to draft correspondence on behalf of Paula. I think it would have been the synthesis of conversations with her and with others with the team working on this, and it was kind of putting that together into a draft.
You say there, obviously the points about the Ombudsman and past prosecutions could set hairs running, but equally we probably do need to register these issues with the board at this stage. Obviously feel free to change or expand the drafting. What did you mean by set hairs running?
I assume what I meant at this point, I'm not sure there'd been much conversation with the board about the implications of the Second Sight report for past prosecutions. And I think what the emails raising possibly for the first time, as it could result in more appeals being made. So it's kind of recognising that may be new news or going further than some of the previous briefings to the board.
Are the hairs running from the board? So is the suggestion that it could get the board asking questions about past prosecutions? And that was something of concern.
Yes, I mean, I think it must have meant, I think I was absolutely referring to the potential reaction of the board.
And why would that be of a concern?
So why would what be a concern?
Isn't the board's purpose to ask questions, to scrutinise? What would be wrong with setting hairs running at board level in relation to past prosecutions?
I don't think I'm saying there's anything wrong with them asking questions. I think clearly that would be their role too. I think I'm just highlighting that this, as I understood it, was perhaps going further than Paula had briefed the board on previously. So, be aware this may well provoke questions. I don't think I was suggesting there was anything inappropriate about that.
It doesn't set hairs running suggest some sort of negative implication. Things that shouldn't be taking place.
I don't think I would have. No, I don't think that's what I meant by that phrase. I don't think I'd be suggesting it was being appropriate for the board to be asking questions about that. Not at all.
If we could scroll down, please, we can have a look at the penultimate bullet point. So this is a draft brief to the board. It says as follows: one of the main reputational and potentially financial risks arising from the review relates to possible attempts to reopen past prosecutions based on the findings. James Arbuthnot was certainly focused on this point. Susan and the legal team are working with our external lawyers to consider whether there are any implications arising from the report for past cases, and we can provide a further update on this work next week. This is in particular the paragraph that you were concerned about setting hairs running, was it?
Yes, as I say, I think this was probably going further than had been briefed to the board previously.
One of the main reputational and potentially financial risks. How about human impact on individuals' lives, possible attempts to reopen past prosecutions? I mean, might it have been an impact for the board that people have been wrongly prosecuted?
Absolutely, and clearly in hindsight and everything we know now, that absolutely should have been the top concern. At the time, the view of the business wasn't that the previous prosecutions had been unsound.
But that's what James Arbuthnot was saying, wasn't he? He was concerned about actual humans, individuals being prosecuted and having been prosecuted when they should not have been.
Yes, I think it's completely fair to say this email reflects the mindset of the business at the time. And there clearly wasn't enough focus on the actual safety of those prosecutions and the human impact.
The second half of that sentence, of that paragraph, Susan and the legal team are working with our external lawyers to consider whether there are any implications arising from the report for past cases. So we're here at the 5th of July. You were aware that Susan Crichton was working with an external law firm to consider the implications. Is that right?
Yes.
The second site report itself was dated the 8th of July. Let's have a look at that day. Could we please turn to Pol 00381077? And could we start by looking at the bottom email on that page, please? So the head of public relations has emailed about the BBC News. So this is on the day of the Second Sight's publication. Just to let you know that the BBC News has carried a news in brief piece with accompanying branch footage, which lasted about 20 seconds, ran along the lines of around 100 sub-postmasters are embroiled in a bitter dispute with the post office over a computer system they claim is losing them money every year. Not ideal, but probably the next best thing to nothing appearing at all. We'll circulate the clip once we receive it. Nothing on BBC Online yet. Expecting 2 human interest style regional TV pieces from BBC Look North and BBC Look South. You respond to say, hi, assume, this is to Mark Davis, assume you've seen completely erroneous headline on BBC website and are onto them. Can you recall what the headline was at all?
I think it was along the lines of what Nina Arnott quotes in her email.
If we scroll down, let's have a look at that. And what's wrong with that?
I think the specific bit I was reacting to was the end of that statement, that the computer system is losing their money every year. So I think the bit which felt to me at the time a misrepresentation of the position, a misrepresentation of the allegations being made against Horizon was it'd been changed from a historical issue to there's ongoing problems with the computer system, and that's losing postmasters money every year. Now, in hindsight, we might give more credence to that, but at the time, that felt a very different representation to the allegations we're dealing with.
But all it's saying is that they claim, 100 people are claiming that it is losing the money every year. It's not presenting it as fact, is it?
No, but I think I was very conscious of, we're all very conscious of what impact headlines could have on postmaster confidence, public confidence, client confidence in the commuter system. And I think we all knew it's quite easy for headlines to undermine confidence in possibly an unfair way.
If we scroll up, Mark Davis says, hugely yes. And your response is, thought you would be arseholes. Who are the arseholes?
I'm referring to the BBC coverage there.
Was it part of your job to seek to control the narrative of the press?
No, I mean not specifically. That was Mark's job. I think very limited numbers of occasions where I would comment on this, but this came to my attention as I describe it. The reaction I had at the time is it felt like it was whilst it was entirely appropriate for the BBC to be reporting on the allegations against Horizon, it felt like it had misrepresented it and turned it into a different story which had far greater ongoing implications for the safety of Horizon. So I was reacting emotionally to that and issuing what's probably a bit of an uncharacteristic email for me.
But again, we saw that brief to the board in which you described some sort of corporate mindset. Is this another display of that corporate mindset at the time, an us versus them attitude?
The mindset I was referring to earlier was there was absolutely a mindset that clearly a strong conviction at the time in the integrity of Horizon. That was the mindset I was referring to. I don't think at that point in time I would have particularly recognised a them versus us mindset. I wouldn't describe that email as part of that. As I say, I was reacting to a specific aspect of that headline.
It's quite a strong reaction to have to something that simply states an allegation from some postmasters, isn't it?
It is a strong reaction. It's clearly one of those emails you regret. I think it was an over-the-top reaction.
But does it display something wider than just your own personal reaction, a corporate reaction to a BBC report?
As I say, I don't think it does at the time, and maybe this is unfounded, but at the time there was a lot of concern around what the would allegations and headlines about Horizon undermine wider public confidence in the system. At the time, the financial crisis was still recent memory. We all know media headlines provoked and undermined public confidence in systems back then. So that type of experience was front of mind, and we were concerned about what impact media statements could have on the wider market position of Post Office. In hindsight, I agree, it was an overreaction, but I think what it represents was anxiety around what statements around Horizon could have for wider client and customer confidence and postmaster confidence in Horizon.
Just customer confidence or potential flotation business interests?
I wasn't drawing any link whatsoever to the Royal Mail flotation. That absolutely wasn't in my mind at the time.
In terms of timing, that was the 8th of July. 15th of July was the date we know of the Simon Clark advice. You also mentioned in your briefing to the board about Susan Crichton meeting with lawyers. She's given us evidence on that. She said that there was a meeting on the 3rd of July. There was also a meeting on the 10th of July addressing the Gareth Jenkins issue. At this stage, were you aware of the Gareth Jenkins issue?
No, I wasn't.
Could we please look at the final document before the lunch break, Poll 002979115. Page 3, please. If we scroll down, sorry, page 3, over the page, please. The bottom email of page 3. Thank you. A solicitor, Rosie Gaisford from Bond Dickinson, has emailed you, and she says as follows: a letter from the Criminal Cases Review Commission dated the 12th of July 2013, addressed to Paula Venables, is attached above. We have drafted a holding response to the CCRC's letter to be sent out tomorrow morning. The holding response is currently in Paula's name. Are you happy for this to be sent out in Paula's name, or would you rather it was sent out in your name, Susan Crichton's name, or in the name of another individual? A substantive response has also been drafted on the CCRC's letter. Once this substantive response has been discussed with Brian Altman, QC, a leading criminal barrister and former Treasury Counsel, it will be sent out by the end of the week. And if we look above, it says it's a response from you, and you say, thanks, Rosie. I think both this and the substantive response should come from Susan. Did you discuss this with Paula Venables?
I think at the time Paula had already given the steer to Susan that it should come from her, so I was conscious of that. As you see in the next sentence, I asked Susan if she'd give her the opportunity to disagree with that view.
It isn't every day that the Criminal Cases Review Commission writes to the CEO of a company. What kind of discussions did you have with Paula Venables about the CCRC's interest at that time?
I don't recall any conversations with Paula on this.
None at all?
No.
Would you have discussed with her who should send the letter?
As I say, I was aware. I think she had already, what I had already seen was if I recall correctly, she had forwarded on the original letter to Susan and asked her to respond. So I kind of was conscious she had already given that steer.
Were you aware of Mr. Clark's advice or concerns about the use of Gareth Jenkins at that time?
No, I wasn't.
You were aware that Susan Crichton was liaising with external lawyers during that period, and the brief to the board said something along the lines of, we can provide a further update on this work next week. That was the 5th of July. What investigations or inquiries did you make into the discussions that Susan Crichton was having?
I think the next step in the chronology, and we might come on to this, if I recall correctly, there was then a broader board update note prepared, I think on the 26th of July, which included updates on all of the work streams related to this matter, including where Susan had got to with the external lawyers. So I think that was the next step, and that was based on input from Susan and a number of others.
And did that refer to, for example, Mr. Jenkins?
No, it didn't.
And who drafted that brief?
So it's another document which I coordinated. I held the pen on it, but it was based on input from Susan on the legal side, Allan, I think the network side on the branch improvement work stream. It was based on input from a number of different work stream leads across the business.
Thank you. So that may be an appropriate moment to take our lunch break.
Yeah,
Could we come back at 10 to 2, please?
yeah, certainly.
Thank you very much.